everybody, and welcome to another board game review and gameplay demo. Today I'm really excited to have another Kickstarter preview, this time for Chibi Commander, an asymmetric skirmish-style alien invasion game. The creator of this game was nice enough to send me a copy to take a look at before he launches it on Kickstarter, so I'm excited to share some of my thoughts with you guys. Before I really get started though, if you haven't done so already, please take a look at all my various social media pages and my Patreon. Over there you'll be able to interact with me in all sorts of different ways, and you can do a lot of cool things like vote on new videos and all sorts of other cool stuff. Jumping right into Chibi Commander. As I mentioned, this is an asymmetric alien invasion style game. Essentially, players will play one of 4 different factions on a skirmish board, and you'll be attacking, defending, using cover, line of sight, all sorts of different upgrades, and a bunch of other really cool stuff. It's a really interesting take on a sort of standardized skirmish style game, where in this case you have not only the mission-based modes, but you also have a full-fledged campaign mode where you can grow and develop your individual characters. It takes anywhere from about 45 minutes or so for a single mission, all the way up to about 5 hours for a full campaign if you do all of the missions. The Kickstarter itself is slated to start in early March, so be on the lookout for it, and keep in mind that as I'm going through and when I show you guys the demo, I've got the pre-printed versions of what you guys can potentially get. The game itself is going to be print and play, but if you pledge at a higher level, you'll be able to get the pre-printed version in the style like I have. But with that, we're going to jump right into what this game is similar to. As far as similarities are concerned, there are 2 major ones that I wanted to mention. First and foremost is Level 7 Omega Protocol. The theme for both of these games is virtually identical. You have aliens invading and you have Earth forces fighting back in some way. You also have this mission-style campaign generation that you can go through. You also have unique set pieces that you can build up, although in Chibi Commander you actually get some 3-dimensional pieces that you can fold up, so it gives you a little bit more immersiveness to it as well. In addition, Chibi Commander has more unique factions that you can play as, which brings me to my second similarity, which is Vast Crystal Caverns. In Vast Crystal Caverns, you have literally, I believe it's 4 different characters that you can play as, and each one has completely different goals from all of the other ones. In Chibi Commander, you have something relatively similar, where you have the mercenaries, the Chibi Commanders, the aliens, and the Reapers. The first 2 and the last 2 are sort of team members, but at the same time they have their own unique goals that they're going for. While they're relatively aligned goals, they are fairly specific for their individual faction. So you're working together, but at the same time you have to work by yourself. One of the great things about Chibi Commander is that you're able to play it with or without the additional factions, and you can play it with up to 4 people. So it makes it a lot of fun and really interesting, not to mention flexible and replayable. That said, I'm going to move right on ahead into how to play Chibi Commander. Alright everybody, we're all set up and ready to start playing Chibi Commander. As I mentioned, this is a game that's all about alien invasions, and more specifically, it's a game where we have either a full campaign going on, or we can do one-shot missions every time. Right now, I have this set up for the first mission, where we have the Chibi Commanders right over here, and then we have the aliens over here in their little UFO. Now, the idea behind this game is it's a team-based game. You can have 2 versus 2 or 1 versus 1. There are 4 total factions, the aforementioned Chibi and aliens, and then you also have the Reapers, which work with the aliens, and the mercenaries, which work with the Chibis. As with most games of this style, there is a lot of missions to choose from, and in this case I've chosen just the basic introductory one, but before I get into actually playing through, I'm going to explain how the basic mechanics work, going through some of the cards and all that kind of thing. First off, I'll go over the general anatomy of some of the character cards that we're going to be seeing. Essentially, every single one is going to have numerous different symbols all over it, and these all obviously mean specific things. We've got things that look like a sort of crosshair with blue dots on it. We've got something that looks sort of like a Samus Aran Metroid ball on it. We've got little arrows at the bottom. We've got the hearts, all sorts of different things. So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort of go down the list to explain what each thing is. On your turn, every unit is able to do 2 actions, and these symbols indicate the various actions you're able to do, aside from the hearts. The hearts will just indicate how much health a character has. If they go down to 0 health, they get knocked out. If they lose 2 more health, then they're dead and they're removed from the board. If you see 2 filled in double black diamonds, that essentially means that an action occurs twice for only a single action point, for example, shooting a gun 2 times. The movement action is indicated by the arrows at the bottom of the card, whatever color they happen to be. For every individual little speck, that means it's a single movement for that particular action. So for example, if we look at the soldier, they have 3 individual arrows, which means you can move 3 spaces. And all of the movement in this game is cardinal. It's not orthogonal, so you can only move up, down, left, right, not diagonally. Some characters have shields, which in addition to coming from cover, they can have inherently. The target cross is the one that looks sort of like a regular cross and it has little blue dots on it. That essentially indicates how likely you will be to hit a target when you use a gun action or an attack action. Next up is you have the little thing that looks like a Samus Aran ball that has little spikes sticking out of it. And that indicates how many dice you roll in order to determine the damage that you do. The more of the little spikes you have, the more dice you're going to get. The explosion symbol next are individual little wavy lines that sort of surround that same ball. And this is essentially splash damage. For everyone that you have additional damage from other dice in, again, the 4 cardinal directions. Next up, we have the leader star. This is just a giant yellow star that are on some of the characters, and these allow you to utilize command actions where you can re-roll dice or do extra movement, something along those lines. We have the red crosses, which indicate that the characters can heal themselves or others. We have psionics, which look like little alien heads, and that essentially just means that you're doing a psionic attack. Last but not least, we have the teleportation symbol, which looks like either a blue or purple sort of spirally type thing, and that essentially means that you're allowed to move without having to worry much about cover. During your movement, you have to be aware of obstacles, and this is where cover comes into play. So you can see I've placed a lot of different obstacles all over the board here, including some trees that are standing up and a bunch of other things. This is all set up during the regular setup of the game, where the players will all sort of take the terrain and move it around and put it wherever they feel like. So the way that cover works in this game is relatively simple. If you are relatively speaking behind cover in terms of the line of sight of a character, they will not be able to see you. For example, all the way down here, I have a soldier in this little spot, and it's looking across at this little log right here. So in other words, that soldier cannot see this civilian because the log is in the line of sight. Right? On the other hand, I have a medic over here that is right next to the log. Here, I'll scoot this up a little bit so it's easier to see. If the medic is right next to the log, that means that the medic can essentially see over the log and the line of sight is not blocked by it. This happens whenever you're directly adjacent to an obstacle. You can also climb over or around obstacles by spending 2 movement points. In addition, your line of sight gets blocked by having multiple things in front of you. While it's not as relevant over here, we've got a civilian right here standing right next to a log, and there's 2 animals. There's a sheep and a cow. Right? And essentially, if the civilian was looking over here, they'd be able to see the sheep, but not the cow, because the cow, the line of sight to the cow is being blocked by the sheep. On that note, one very important thing for the aliens and the reapers is they actually get 2 individual little tokens. And you may notice that they're not these sort of large rectangular ones that the chibis get. Instead, we have these little square ones. The reason that these start off as squares is because they start off as radar blips, essentially. That's literally what they're called. And each one has 2. One of them is a ghost, the other one is the actual unit. You can see on the back here, one of them is just an arbitrary symbol from the game, in this case how many dice you get to see if you hit, and the other one is the actual unit. You can move these so-called ghost blips as if they're a regular blip. They move 8 spaces and they can pick up and move around and do all that kind of stuff. But essentially, if they ever get within line of sight of any of the other characters, the so-called bad characters, the mercenaries or the chibis, that means that you are forced to flip them around and indicate whether it was a fake blip or if it was actually a unit. If it was a unit, then you would take whatever that unit's card is and you would place the blip on the board. You can also do that voluntarily at any time, and again, that's only if you're playing as the Reapers and or the aliens. So the idea is that they have much higher movement capabilities because they can essentially move around faster when they're sort of unknown, which kind of makes sense, right? And that's sort of the idea behind it. Other than that, some of the other actions you can do, doors are free to open except for the alien doors. The humans have to spend a movement point to do that. Again, you can move over obstacles by spending 2 movement. And one last thing on that note is if something is in a coma, in other words, if it's down, sheeps won't go into comas, but still, that means that you'd be able to see behind them because they're essentially fallen. You can also revive an adjacent character, and you can force them to move around as well. If you're a chibi, then you can have a civilian move around, or you can literally pick up and sort of link yourself to another one to have them move around, which becomes important later in this. In addition, in other scenarios, we've got different rooms that have all sorts of doors and roads and all sorts of other crazy cool stuff. It gets pretty awesome very quickly. Last but not least, I'm going to talk about how attacking works. So just based off of this scenario here, let's say that I use my little alien dude right here. So, got this guy. And let's say that I've got my soldier right here. Right? So the soldier can easily see this alien dude right here. The line of sight limit is 7 spaces. So what I would do is if I want to attack him, I would spend one of my actions, and then because he has 2 dice for his range, I would roll 2 dice. This will essentially indicate the range that I'm at that I can actually utilize. So I use my big giant die here. So I got a 5 and a 5, so that's perfectly fine. That means that within 10 of me, I will be able to hit. Now remember, line of sight is only 7, so I'd be able to hit pretty much anywhere that I want. One thing to note is that if you roll a 1 on your d6s for this, that means that unfortunately you have what's called a slip. If you have a slip, that means that you then check to see how far away you are. If you're farther away than 2 times the number of dice, that means that it still counts as a hit if you're within the range. So if I had rolled, say, a 1 and a 3, that's a total of 4, and my slip here is 1, so I'm 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 away. That means I would be okay, but I didn't roll enough to actually hit him, unfortunately. But in this case, I was able to hit, so I would roll 1 damage die, and that would have me do no damage, unfortunately. I rolled a 0 on it. But that's essentially how the combat works. And again, the idea behind it is that your crosshairs will indicate whether or not you hit, and then you roll your damage. Kind of similar to something like D&D and things like that. Now, getting back very briefly to this particular scenario here, one interesting thing about this game is that for every mission, every campaign aspect, the individual factions have their own particular goals. In this case, the aliens are trying to get all of the, they're trying to capture civilians and animals, as well as kill the Chibi Commanders. The Chibi Commanders are trying to save the civilians by moving them off the board, and also trying to kill the aliens. On the other hand, I'm not playing with them, but if you're playing with the mercenaries and the Reapers, they have different ideas as well. The mercenaries are just trying to kill aliens, and the Reapers are trying to basically take civilians and drag them to the edge of the map, and a few other things. Every single faction has their own unique sort of ideas of what they're trying to do, essentially, is what it boils down to. So it's kind of cool. It's really interesting in that sense. So what we're going to do is we have the aliens go first. And so what that means is that they'll move around and do whatever they need. Again, opening doors is free for them. So for example, we could take this guy and open the door and then move 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I can pick up this cow, right? And that cow is mine, right? As we go through the game, we'll be earning victory points as we complete goals. In this case, for every goal we complete, we can get between 1 and 2 victory points, essentially. At the end of these scenarios, if we're going into a campaign mode, we can spend these to upgrade our individual units. So essentially the way that this particular scenario goes is the Chibis are essentially moving this way, trying to get into the UFO and trying to take down the aliens, while the aliens are trying to move that way to collect the civilians and the animals, as well as kill the Chibis. And effectively we just keep going back and forth. Again, during each round, every unit gets activated and they get to do their 2 actions, which means that you can move twice, you can move and shoot and move, you can shoot twice if you stand still, you can do pretty much whatever you want. Again, if you're a commander, you can use your particular commander abilities, all of those kinds of things. So there's a lot of options that you can do. And again, just watching out for cover, like many of these sort of skirmish style games. So it's fairly simple, but those are the general mechanics on it. I won't play too much through it though, just because everything is so far away. Just moving on, what I wanted to talk about next was the upgrade system. The way that upgrades work is actually fairly simple. Every group will have a piece of paper kind of like this, right? So these pieces will indicate what your upgrades do and what they are. So you can see at the bottom, those are your level 1, those are your starters. And then you go to level 2 and finally level 3. To go from level 1 to level 2 costs you 2 victory points. Level 2 to level 3, same thing, it's 2 victory points. And again, that's for the campaign mode, which I find really cool with a game like this especially, because it means that you can keep with your same people and you can make them bigger, better, stronger, faster, and all of that kind of stuff. But essentially, as you go through here, you're gradually going to be going through and you fold back your little hearts to indicate this. Now, one thing to note is that the component pieces for this, as they come from Kickstarter, are going to be a little bit different, right? Instead of folding back the little heart pieces like this, there's going to be little chips to keep track of that, and there's going to be a few other minor changes, including some of the scenery as well as the UFO. This little block thing is, I believe, a stretch goal if I'm not mistaken. But if you get the already printed version, then it's going to be things of this relative quality, so pretty good. And it looks pretty good. It's a fun little game. It's a very interesting and fun skirmish game. Again, these are not generally the types of games that I enjoy, so I was kind of surprised. And one of the cool things is that there's all sorts of different maps that you get. So you can see there's a tremendous amount of detail. Oh, sorry, Tree. There's a tremendous amount of detail on some of these. And like I said, you actually get these 3-dimensional rooms that include doors that have to be opened up and stuff like that. So you'll fold these out and put them down. All sorts of different things. And like I said, there's lots of missions that you can go on. The campaign mode is pretty interesting, so you can do a whole lot with that, including keeping up all of the individual units. All of these scenarios and maps have different starting values, starting characters. You can change what you start with, what you don't start with, and you also have this little dude who looks like Godzilla. So that's pretty awesome just on its own. But with all of that, I'm going to stop rambling about it, and we're just going to go right on into the pros and cons for Chibi Commander. I hope that you enjoyed my little demo for how to play Chibi Commander. Moving right into the pros and cons. First and foremost, the pros. The biggest pro for me personally is I love the progression system that this game offers. Having the level 1 moving to level 2 and level 3 really reminded me a bit of the XCOM video game. Not so much the board game, but really the video game, and being able to see your soldiers grow and mature and get new capabilities and all of that kind of stuff. Having that campaign mode and that sort of stepwise thing is a huge thematic aspect for me that I love in a lot of different games. The second major thing that I wanted to mention is component specific. Again, if you pledge the Kickstarter at a high enough level, I'm not certain exactly what it is, but you can get the already printed stuff like I have. And it's actually some pretty good quality, not quite cardboard, but it's like a really heavily laminated paper, and it works really nicely, and I think that the standees work very well. As far as a print and play game is concerned, it's pretty good. On top of that, having the little pieces that can fold up and you have the little rooms and all those kinds of things really help with the immersion aspect, as well as being able to tell line of sight at just a brief glance rather than taking out your little straight edge and just seeing if there is line of sight. Another big pro for me is the asymmetric gameplay. You guys know that I love games that have different abilities, different capabilities, and that add replay value. Having the Reapers, Aliens, Chibi Commanders, as well as the Mercenaries at your disposal and being able to play as the different ones at different times means that you can work towards specific goals. As you go through the campaign mode, then you'll see different goals, and depending on how well you do, you'll be able to upgrade or not upgrade. You'll also be able to get new people in, or you'll be forced to move people out, and all sorts of other cool stuff. It's a really interesting campaign mode, and I was excited to see it in a game like this because I do love the sci-fi theme as well. It's something that I particularly enjoy and that I know a lot of my friends and fellow gamers enjoy as well. With regard to cons for this game, there were a couple that I wanted to mention, although none of them are really deal breakers or make the game unplayable. First and foremost is the art. It's an anime style, kind of goofy, sort of cartoonish thing, and I do enjoy anime, but I'm not a huge fan of it. So for a game like this, I prefer something like Level 7's art, where it's a little bit more gritty and realistic and things like that. But at the same time, I understand that a game like this definitely has its place in the niche, and that people who enjoy that style of art would really enjoy it. Not to mention the fact that it doesn't really go overboard like some games do. Next up on the cons, and definitely the biggest one, is the rulebook. The person who designed this game is German, and I don't know if he did the translations himself or if he had somebody else do them, but like many times when you have games that get translated from one language to another, you miss out on some things, and especially with independently developed games like this, you also have potential issues where you miss out on specific aspects in the rules. The nice thing is that a lot of these will probably be fixed throughout the time of the Kickstarter, or at the very least the rules can be updated. So as an example of that, the blips. The idea that you can have the aliens and the Reapers expressed as blips, and then the ghost blips and all that, is really not explained explicitly in the rules. It's just sort of implied by saying, here's how the blips move, and then it's like, oh, okay, I guess I'm using the blips type of thing. So just little things like that make it a little bit more difficult to sort of wrap your head around initially, but once you read through the rules several times, it's relatively easy to get, and you can at least get through and play through it. And as long as you're not a rules lawyer and super obsessive about doing everything perfectly right, you shouldn't have any major issues. The final con for me is also directly related to one of my pros, and it relates to the component quality. Again, the version that I got was directly sent to me to review by the creator of the game, which I truly appreciate, and it's this really nice laminate paper. But at the same time, if it's designed as a print and play style game, I really don't see how it would work, especially having to fold up the little pieces for the rooms and things like that. You would need some really heavy cardstock to make it work properly. So I know it's a lower level on the Kickstarter, but if you can, I would highly recommend getting it to the level where you would be able to get an already printed version on this style of material, because it just makes things so much easier. And I know for me, if I had just done it as a print and play, I would end up having to like try and fold up a regular 8.5 by 11 paper, and it just would not work simply. That said, moving on to general conclusions for this game, overall I really enjoyed it. Again, I had a very difficult time getting through the rules initially, but I'm sure that's going to be worked out, not necessarily before the Kickstarter begins, but certainly as the Kickstarter goes through and during production and everything. I imagine that the rules will get some clarity and some editing and all of that good stuff. So I can't imagine that that's not really fixable, and honestly that was the biggest issue I have. Having the asymmetry of all the different factions, the ability to play through singular missions or go through the campaign mode depending on how much time you want to put into it, being able to upgrade your units all throughout, all of that kind of stuff is absolutely incredible, and I think it's a very well designed and reasonably well balanced game overall. I had a really fun time with it, my gaming group had a fun time with it. If you're a fan of sci-fi games, and especially if you're a fan of the skirmish style, line of sight, roll and move, or you know, just roll to attack style of games, not to mention having the different abilities of the characters, I recommend at least taking a look at it. Again, it'll be out on Kickstarter in early March, so take a look at it. But with that, thank you very much for taking a look at this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.